Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are going to do a deep dive into deep cuts. And this is our spoiler-free intro episode. We will be talking about the creative team. We normally talk about the publisher, but this is Image, and we've discussed them quite a bit in the past.
Yeah.
So no discussion of Image, but it's a big creative team today.
It is, yeah. This is a different, although I guess it is similar to when we a few weeks back when we discussed Swan Songs as part of Death Month, where it is an anthology series, and then there's kind of a part of the creative team is stable. This book, Deep Cuts, has two co-writers, but every issue brings in a different artist to try and bring a different feel, a different mood, a different vibe to the story. Although this Deep Cuts is structured differently than Swan Songs was. Swan Songs was a true anthology where each story was separate. Here, they are kind of loosely connected, but still, there's 6 issues, different artists each time out. So it's something to talk about in terms of why. Or what each artist brought to that specific story, because each story is set in a different place in a different time. So I think they were looking for artists that kind of mimic the feel they were going for that specific era, that specific time period.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very impressive book, and I think all our listeners should know, in case it isn't abundantly apparent when you listen to the Zeros, this is Alex's wheelhouse. He's not only does he do the research, but often him not doing research would match about what I did if I did research. So I think it's not the only thing you bring to the podcast, but I think the more of the encyclopedic knowledge of comics and creators and all of this stuff. And I mean, I think it took a good year of the podcast before I stopped referring to books by just referring to the author.
Yeah, and
it's just a bad habit that you pick up at comic shops.
It is. It's a tough thing, the way that people talk about comics as they think of it as a writer's medium, because writers are almost always listed first. And whether that, that may be convention, that's fine, but it is still, it is a collaborative effort. And I think part of that too, for Mike, on your journey on this, is the more you go to comic conventions and speak with comic creators and you speak
100%.
to writers, they are the first people to gently remind folks, of who their collaborators are, of who their co-creators are. And because they, being in it, they understand that it's not just them. And even the writers that are also artists and that work both sides, if it's a book that they only wrote on, they're going to let you know. And then there are plenty of writers who are just writers who can't draw a lick, no shots at someone like Tom King or anything like that. But these guys absolutely know that there's a whole side of this, a gigantic side of the process that they can't do. And if you were to say, oh yeah, it's Tom King's Mr. Miracle, like Tom King would get offended by that, and I've heard him talk about things, address situations like that. So yeah, it is, I hope with people listening to this that they, we want to highlight all the people that go into it. So it's not just the artists as well. We want to talk about who the colorist and the letterer is. We've talked about editors and maybe people just do covers for a series, because all of that is part of the stew that makes comics, and all those aspects of it are what draw us to the story. It's not just the writing, it's the presentation, it's what's shown in between the words and the dialogue and all that. So yeah, it's I think in general, specifically between you and I, Mike, I have read a lot more. So when we go through the creative team, it's a very large creative team. Like, I've read a lot of the books that some of these artists have done. So, at least the ones that have done maybe a little more mainstream work. So I am a little more familiar, and that's part of the draw for me as well. I see a name like Kyle Higgins, who's one of the co-writers here, and I've read a ton of his stuff, and I'm very excited when I see his name, but I see some of the artists he's worked on, and some of those names I don't recognize, but a couple of the ones I do, and think, oh, that's awesome. They got Ramon Perez for an issue. They got Juni Ba for an issue, and I know their style, and so I'm thinking, well, how wild is that they brought him in for one issue? That sort of thing. So yeah, it's I like doing these. I like going through and seeing what some of these creators, other works they've done that maybe I didn't even know about, that I need to go back and check, and we'll actually get to one of those in a little bit here. An artist that I did really love, who's someone whose name I knew before reading Deep Cuts, but in doing the research for this, saw he had done another book that I went out and read quite literally the next day. So I'm able to talk about it now. I can when I bring it up here, but I didn't even know he had done it. But I went and checked it out because doing these episodes has forced me to do a dive into these creators and learn some of their works of even the people that I thought I've read a lot of, and I knew their work already. So it's fun for me to go back through, because ultimately it just means I find more comics to read.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% right, and I think now I'm at, I don't know, like 12 years of comic collecting, which is, I mean, and I know that you had it in fits and starts. There was like breaks for college, and get back into it later. But I didn't even have the childhood stuff, and so much of my reading has been going like, first you find your big two characters you like. For me, it was like Batman, Daredevil, Flash, Green Arrow a little bit, and go backward and read, try to read as much of the old stuff as you can.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's the fire hose of new stuff coming out.
And especially in the last like decade plus or so, when that fire hose is even more than it was 20, 25 years prior. So when you're jumping in, there is even more new stuff coming out than there had been. That's just how the industry goes. So you feel like you're always playing catch up.
Yeah, I mean, right now, if you were like getting into comics for the first time and you said, "Oh, I really love Batman," and you go to, our shop in town here, there's literally a wall of Batman. Yeah. And it's like the whole back wall of the shop.
It's Batman and Bat Family stuff. Yeah.
It's Batman and Bat Family stuff. And there are at least 4 titles coming out a month that are Batman. And that's a conservative guess. So it's a daunting and overwhelming world, but it feels less so like once you notice the creator, like you will in Deep Cuts here, now you'll notice them every time you see their name. Yeah. And the world starts to feel a little bit smaller. And I think that's some of the value in these Zero episodes, is talking about these creators, what else they've done, and you start making a connection of like, oh, you know what? I actually did read that book. I just didn't pay attention to who the creators were other than the writer.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is one of those transitions where you'll start with character. Most of people's way in is through, a lot of it's through superheroes. It's one of the big two. You're right. You pick your favorite character. It's Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, whoever, the X-Men. But as the more and more you read, you start, once you transition out of following a character and following a creator or creators, that's when the world starts to expand, because you see, well, what are the other things this person has done? And even if I don't know this character, or this is some creator-owned indie book that I know nothing about, I'm willing to take a chance on it because I've just read 45 issues of this guy write this character that I like. I just saw 12 issues of this artist and I love her work. What else has she done? It's that sort of thing, and that can broaden your horizons. And so, hopefully, people can we shine some light on these creators, and people can find out kind of other things they've done and expand that reading. And I think that's why you and I want to focus on creator-owned comics, on indie published comics. Just by definition, smaller releases, things that even bigger name release like Paper Girls, which is a huge book, but still pales in comparison to when Brian K. Vaughan or Cliff Chiang were working at Marvel or DC.
Yeah,
like it doesn't matter what they do on the independent side. It'll never be, you'll never sell as much as if you're writing Batman. You'll never sell as much as if you're writing Spider-Man, and that's just how it goes. So,
well, in the world we live in, every once in a while, like you'll still pick up a new book every once in a while on the shelf and be like, I've never even heard of this publisher. Which literally happened yesterday. I went to the shop and we were talking about Sean Murphy, and they handed me this Zorro book that he did.
Yeah, his Zorro book. Yeah, which is pretty cool.
I think it's on the horizon for our podcast. Just premise alone of Don Quixote meets Narcos. But I saw the publisher was massive, and it was like, oh well, that used to be Whatnot Publishing.
Whatnot,
like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, but even then, I maybe read one issue of anything from Whatnot. So and Whatnot was no more than 3 or 4 years old, I don't think.
Yeah,
before they rebranded, renamed.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it's a wild west out there when you get into indie creator and comics, which is why it's nice to have a tour guide. So thank you, Alex. And with that, I say we'll get started. Dealer's choice here.
Cuts, yeah. Well, I mean, the quick, 30,000-foot view deep cuts is 6 issues from Image Comics, like we mentioned. But each issue is double sized. So it's 40 some odd pages. So when collected in a trade, you're getting almost 12 issues worth of material. So they're pretty hefty reads. But I think it's cool that they got the latitude to do that. It took a year for all 6 issues to come out. It started in April 2023, and I think it went April and then May for issues 1 and 2. Then it went to July for issue 3. Then January of 2024 for issue 4, February for issue 5. So like, hey, back-to-back months, and then it was the next April 2024. So I remember as this book came out, I read the first 2 issues because they came out monthly, and then didn't know when the third one came out. I was like, oh crap, the third one's out, and the fourth one took a half a year to come out, and I didn't read it all until early last year as we're recording this, right before the trade came out, because the trade came out in May 2024. So a month after issue 6 came out, the trade came out, meaning they had it kind of ready to go. But I held off on it because there was, for whatever reason, there were delays, and it could be a writing thing, a production thing, an art thing. Who knows? We have no idea. It's just one of those things that happens. I'm just glad they got to the end of their story. I'm glad they got to.
The weird thing to me is that once they are caught up a little bit, they do back-to-back months again toward the end, and it's like, why not just make it look more intentional and just do one a quarter or something? Now that it's all done and in the bag, whatever. This is one of those books that felt like it was taking a long time, but I actually didn't track that. I was just blaming myself for being like a trade waiter. I was like, I think I grabbed issues 1 and 2, and then we saw Higgins at GalaxyCon, and he had 3 on the stand there, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize 3 was out, and he was like, yeah, it's right here. So I got 3, and I got it signed by him, and whatever. But
I think we saw him at a con in December of 2023. So it was right before issues 4 and 5 would have come out the following January, February. But it had been 3 had come out middle of the year 2023, so it had been a long stretch. So it's something that happens. But no, this one is definitely not on you in terms of trade waiting, because even I at this point trade waited, and this is definitely a book, as we'll discuss and definitely get in next week, though, even though it is an anthology and you have these isolated stories, there is intentional connective tissue. And if you were to have read this month to month, I think there are things that maybe you wouldn't have picked up on that you do pick up on when you sit and read them all back to back to back to back to back. You understand what the timeline is and what the threads they're following. And I think it's a much more rewarding experience if when you get to the end, the things that happened in issues 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are fresh enough that it all coalesces in 6 for you. So this is a book that I think really benefits from that, just because of the structure, even though on the surface it seems like 6 disparate stories, 6 anthology stories. They really are connected. So having those big delays as it was coming out in single issue, like those were tough to navigate. That was difficult and a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, that said, I do think this is a book where if there's one issue that you particularly like, you could just give that single issue to someone on the street.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah.
this is a standalone story.
Oh,
Enjoy.
100%. Each story is self-contained, and they're telling a very specific narrative with those characters. And yeah, depending on so real quick, Deep Cuts is a anthology about the history of jazz in America, and we'll go into that a little more later here. But so each issue is a certain era and a certain place, and how the music of the time, specifically through jazz, influenced that time and place. And so, yeah, if you're interested in one place, one time, one style, you can get that in issue and get a great story. But when you read them all, you see the whole kind of tapestry that the creative team was laying out. So I think it's more rewarding in that way. But you're absolutely right, because it is an anthology and it is still structured that way. I think that's the beauty of how this comic is structured and presented, is that you can get these individual stories and you can get the larger story, depending on how you approach it. Yeah. So I think this is great work. Specifically, I think in this case, by planning by the two co-writers, who I guess we'll start going through the team right now. The co-writers are Joe Clark and Kyle Higgins. Kyle Higgins is probably, right now is recording this, he is one of the biggest names in specifically kind of independent creator-owned comics. I'll start with him. He's a writer. He's also a film director. I think he's also a musician. He kind of multifaceted, but the thing he's known for right now over at Image is he created what's known as the Massive Verse. He was one of the driving forces behind Radiant Black, which is a kind of Super Sentai Mighty Morphin Power Rangers spin, kind of his own take on that. And him and some of his writing and artist friends and previous collaborators have all come together, and they built this kind of micro universe called the Massiverse, encompassing like a whole bunch of titles: Radiant Black, Rogue Sun, The Dead Lucky, Infernal Good Red, Radiant Pink, No One, and a book called Cowl, Cowl, which is an early creator-owned book that Kyle Higgins created with co-writer Alex Siegel and artist Rod Rice, that has been like retroactively added into the overall Massiverse. So he's built this, and it's super popular. I started reading Radiant Black. It was cool. I fell off it, and then need to get back into trading. I fell off, and not out of quality, just that because there's so much stuff to read, as kind of you and I have already talked about. But it's a book I need to get back into. But it's when you go to cons and you talk to Kyle, who's super great and super engaging with the fans, the fandom around Radiant Black and the Massiverse is just really something cool, and I'm sure it feels incredibly rewarding for him, that something he helped co-create with kind of literally his friends in the industry, and have built out to all these different titles and like multimedia as well, like narrative podcasts, and I think they want to do films. Like they want to blow this thing out, and I think it has a fan base for it. So if you know any name associated with Deep Cuts, it's probably going to be Kyle Higgins. He's also done specifically with Alex Siegel and Rod Rice, and another book at Image he did called Hadrian's Wall, which is kind of murder mystery in space. He also did a book called The Dead Hand with Stephen Mooney. Stephen Mooney is a name I brought up a bunch of times. If you have a chance, look up Dead to Rights, which is the World War II with dinosaurs story. It's hilarious. It's awesome. It's great. Written and drawn by Stephen Mooney. Check that out. The origin of so much of the Massiverse, as I mentioned, it's his and his creative teams, his partners. It's their take on the Super Sentai Mighty Morphin Power Rangers kind of storytelling, and it's unsurprising when you go back and look at both Kyle Higgins' career and so many of his other writers and artists. Almost all of them worked on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers at Boom at a time when those comics exploded. And again, I think I've talked about before, when we talk about licensed properties, Power Rangers, the recent history of Power Rangers in the past like 10 some odd years in the comics, has exploded. What the work they did for the fans of that series and those series, because there are multiple iterations of Power Rangers, different casts, different variations, and all that. In the comics, they managed to bring all of that together, like tie it all in kind of like a multiversal thing. And the fans of Power Rangers, they loved it. And those creators, when you go to shows, they get swarmed and they have panels, and people love that as well. And so Kyle Higgins was part of that. He was one of the writers in the room for all of that. And so he and all those other creators, they kind of took some of those ideas and reworked them and put their own spin on it. And that became Radiant Black and the Massiverse. So cutting their teeth with Power Rangers on a licensed property has spun into kind of their own thing that they now own, that has like the veneer of Power Rangers, but when you drill down, like the lore and all that, it's all very different. But on the surface, you can see the connective tissue of, oh, you guys wrote this way, and you took the parts you kind of thought you liked and cool about it, and then made your own thing. And
that you own.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah,
you
that's
own,
the other thing. You're not working on somebody else's IP anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's the same kind of thing of it's just like working at Marvel and DC, which someone like Kyle Higgins has done a ton, where you get set on Batman or maybe a quote unquote a second tier title like a Nightwing or someone else, and you learn how to write and those characters and those ideas, and then you take the parts of that you like, and then no one can accuse you of making your own superhero, of ripping up a superhero, because superheroes are superheroes, but you take the parts of the lore of the established characters that maybe you connected with more than other parts, and then you can make that into your own thing, into a character, a property that you own with your creative partners. And so even though I haven't read the Power Rangers stuff, I know it's popular. I know it's very well done. I know the art is great because I've seen the art in the Massiverse, and I know who those artists are, and it's incredible. And for him to kind of want to keep working with those people on their own thing that they create and work on together, I think it's really cool. And I think it speaks to kind of the collaborative nature, because Kyle Higgins is someone who oftentimes co-writes with people. He did it throughout the Massiverse. I mentioned Alex Siegel. Joe Clark is his co-writer here. He's co-written a lot of stuff with him. And even over at DC, where I think that's where Kyle Higgins has done most of his for-hire work. One of his first big series he did was a series called Gates of Gotham, which he co-wrote with Scott Snyder. And they worked with artist Trevor McCarthy on that. And that was kind of going into the lore of the establishment of Gotham City, and it tied into the stuff that Scott Snyder did in the New 52 with like the Court of Owls and things like that. If you've read it, I think you kind of understand Snyder kind of helped rewrite or establish like a new history of Gotham, and Kyle Higgins coming in and getting to work with Scott Snyder and tell a story on that. Getting his feet wet in the DC universe, working with a writer like Scott Snyder before getting sent off to kind of do his own thing. He's written a lot of Nightwing. He wrote a kind of standalone alt-universe Nightwing story called Nightwing New Order, again with Trevor McCarthy, the same artist on Gates of Gotham. And he also was the main writer on Nightwing during the New 52. He wrote the first 29 issues. That was Nightwing wearing the red.
Which were some pretty shocking issues because they lead into the Grayson thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So he wrote the first 29, and then issue 30 was the transition, and then that title became Grayson. But again, he's given a solo title on, Nightwing is my co-favorite DC character. Even though the red uniform, the look wasn't my favorite, I still really enjoyed those stories. I think he did a lot of good work there. More recently, he's done some work over at Marvel in the past, like 4 or 5 years, something like that. He rebooted Darkhawk with Juan and Ramirez. Darkhawk is an old school, like 80s a character, kind of ridiculous, but it was kind of a new reboot in 2021 with a new person taking up the mantle. He did an Ultraman series when Marvel got that license. He co-wrote that with Matt Groom. Who they're also working on a currently going on as we record this, what's going to be upcoming is a Spider-Verse versus Venomverse event, which is surely going to be wildly ridiculous. But he's
As
co-writing
long
that.
as they don't let Sony make the movies of it.
Yeah, well,
you know?
Spider-Verse has been massively popular in the comics, and to the point where like they run a version of it almost every single year. It's a way just to get creators in and do kind of short stories of weird random spider character, and they did the same thing with Venom, and now they're crossing over, and he said he's working with Matt Groom again. He's worked with before. The last kind of notable Marvel thing I think Kyle Higgins has is he did a Winter Soldier miniseries with artist Rod Rice, someone he's worked with again on Cowl, Hadrian's Wall, creator-owned stuff at Marvel. So and I think it's like a 5 or 6 issue mini from maybe about 10 some odd years ago. I think maybe, and if you get any collection of like winter, like an epic collection of Winter Soldier stories, like that's always included there. So him kind of getting a solo miniseries for that character, again, one of the more notable things that he's done. I think the last thing I'll really mention, he's done some other stuff. Higgins has written some other stuff for some smaller publishers like Dynamite and things like that. But he also back during 2020, during the throes of the pandemic, when a lot of creators were launching Kickstarters and things like that, obviously keep working and because people had disposable incomes, they weren't going to shops. He kickstarted a book called The Trap, which he co-wrote with Lance Briggs. Lance Briggs was a former linebacker for the Chicago Bears. Kyle Higgins and Joe Clark, they're both Chicago-based. Kyle Higgins is a big Chicago sports fan, a big Bears fan. And so he kickstarted this book called The Trap. I donated to it, and I got a copy of it. Ended up being released in 2022 by the time it finally came out. And I think what's notable about that is the artist on that was Danilo Beyruth, who is the artist on one of Deep Cuts. So, you see some of these names that are kind of reoccurring. Kyle Higgins works with these people over and over again. He's worked with Rod Rice at Marvel and an Image. Now he kickstarts this book with Danilo Beyruth, ends up working with him on Deep Cuts. Mentioned Joe Clark. Joe Clark is probably more known, at least professionally in his mind, as a musician, composer, arranger. He's a trumpet player. I believe he teaches jazz, teaches music at Northwestern. But he has written comics, and a lot of the stuff he's written, it's pretty much all Image, and it's all written with Kyle Higgins. Outside of Deep Cuts and various massive verse books, he was a co-writer on Ordinary Gods with Kyle Higgins, and also a co-writer on Moon Man, which is a book that was co-written by Joe Clark, Kyle Higgins, and Kid Cudi, the musician, who was credited.
Big pitch,
who was credited by his actual United States name. So again, everything that Joe Clark has worked on, he's worked on with Kyle Higgins. So they have a collaborative effort, and I do think he's probably thinks of something maybe more as a musician, as a jazz player, which leads into what Deep Cuts is about, and I think why these guys wanted to tell this story and kind of what their love and appreciation for the art form is. I will say, before we get into the individual artists for each issue, this book is lettered by Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou, who is a name I think we've mentioned on like 4 or 5 straight Zero issues. I said before, I'll say it again. He's becoming maybe the most prolific letterer in comics. And I think he's one of the best. So, he's here again, and we've mentioned him a ton, a lot of books he's worked on. If you're picking up a book now, especially outside the big two, because the big two kind of have their stable of letterers. So if you're picking up an Image book, a Boom book, something like that, a creator-owned thing, there's a good chance that Haas is lettering it. The interesting thing about this book that I really find is that there's one colorist. Igor Monti. Igor Monti is the colorist. So you have 6 different artists with 6 different styles, but you're bringing in one colorist. And if you look at the issues, the way he's able to vary his style and the color palette and the visual tones and cues, I don't think you would expect that one colorer did it, because a lot of times you do that because I think you want to hold a visual consistency, right?
Right.
different artists, but you want to have the same palette. You want to have the same feel throughout the book. But each one of these issues feel so very different and so very individual. So to see one artist do that, I think is really, 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 really cool. And again, he's someone that the work he's done over at Image, a lot of massive verse books. So he's someone that Kyle Higgins has worked with before on a lot. He also, I believe, did Power Rangers books at Boom. So he's another one of those people that kind of cut their teeth over on Power Rangers and then kind of was corralled in by Kyle Higgins and crew into the Massiveverse books over at Image. And so to see him again, to continue to work with him, I think because he knows his style and kind of trusts what he can bring. And again, the variation that he shows throughout Deep Cuts is so cool, because each book intentionally has a different feel, a different place, different time period, different mood. You would have thought that each artist worked with either color themselves or worked with whatever personal color they normally work with, and yet it's one person throughout the whole series, which is really cool. So I guess now we got to get into each individual issue. 6 issues, 6 different artists. Some of them have kind of long, extensive resumes in comics, and some of them have practically nothing. And I think Deep Cuts is their only or one, at least their most notable interior work, and we'll get to those artists as we move through. But we'll start with issue 1. I mentioned Danilo Beyruth, worked with Kyle Higgins and Lance Briggs on The Trap. He's done a little Marvel work, a lot of maybe some shorter runs and spot issues and stuff on characters like Venom, Carnage, Deadpool, Gwenpool, Ghost Rider. I just think a bunch of characters that I personally don't read. Nothing against the artists of those creative teams, but I've never been fans of those particular artists. He worked with Frank Miller on Frank Miller Presents on a book called Ancient Enemies, and he has done Image work before. Like he's worked on Radiant Black. He also worked on this book called The Singularity, which was co-written by Matt Groom, again a frequent co-writer with Kyle Higgins, and the composer Bear McCready. You familiar with Bear McCready?
No.
Bear McCready did the music for the Battlestar Galactica reboot and a lot of television and stuff as well. He's a great artist. If you watch Battlestar Galactica, which is one of my favorite shows the past 20 some odd years, the score is absolutely incredible, and it's one of those that's like it's integral and inseparable from the show. And so McCreary had made this concept album called The Singularity, and to go along with it, there was this companion comic that was written by him and Matt Groom, and like 24 artists that kind of contributed to it, and Beyruth was one of them that contributed to it. So it's kind of a cool idea, this mixing of music and comics, and again, which is kind of what Deep Cuts is trying to do, and there are a lot of artists that go that way. I think we've mentioned What's the Furthest Place from Here, Matthew Rosenberg, yep, and Tyler Boss. You mentioned you've talked about the Jeff Lemire book. Oh Christ, I'm blanking on it.
Yeah, you gotta give me more than that.
The oh my God, Royal City. Oh my God.
Oh,
yes.
Royal City. Yeah, no, it's literally on my wall. I've got an original
it is.
page.
Yeah, Royal City, where there are playlists and people release soundtracks, and this kind of blending of it is something that I think Kyle Higgins and Joe Clark are very interested in. And so see one of their co-creators on this book working with another co-creator another collaborator that Kyle Higgins has worked with in the same kind of realm. I think there's a marriage of these two art forms there that maybe seems odd on the surface, but you see a lot of crossover with it. So that's Danilo Beyruth, issue 1 there. He's done a little bit of work. You maybe see him again. If you're a Symbiote fan over on Marvel, you've probably seen his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I when I pulled him up, I was like, I think the only other thing I have in my box that he has done is, he did like one of the mini stories in Elektra, Black, White, and Blood.
Yes,
and then he did 2 issues of Jed McKay's Daredevil Man Without Fear miniseries, which was, I think, just like a 5-6 issue series. Yeah. It wasn't like, it was,
he's done, yeah,
it was fine, but it was like,
he's done some spot stuff, some short story stuff.
But
I
he's
think
done enough at Marvel that, like, especially with Jed McKay, and I think including McKay's Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a chance you've crossed paths with him if you read enough Marvel characters. But yes, definitely the Venomverse stuff is. I don't have any of it, and it's the largest portion of his.
It's a lot of stuff
resume.
written by Al Ewing and all that, who's a great writer. But yeah, he's kind of in that stable there, which is kind of vastly different than the artist for issue 2. I guess maybe it's Helena, or I'm going with Helena. Yeah. I'm going with Helena Masellis, who, as far as I can tell, has really done no interior work. She's done a lot of covers, a lot of variants. Power Rangers, House of Slaughter, this book called The Agent, which I really liked, Nice House by the Sea. Upcoming, she's done some variants for Absolute Green Lantern. So we got some Boom books. I can't remember where the agent was. That was a real small press. But Nice House by the Sea is DC Vertigo. Absolute Green Lantern is DC. So done a lot of covers, a lot of variants. Someone who as an artist is kind of really known for just the cover image, and to see her do interior work is really cool to see that style translate, because I don't think she's done a lot. It's possible Deep Cuts is like one of the only interior work stuff she's done, so that's really cool to see them kind of pluck an artist who maybe hasn't done a lot of interiors and give them a chance to tell sequential art story.
I mean, this is what you hope for, in my opinion. This is what you hope for when someone like a Kyle Higgins develops the clout that he has at an indie comic. Like, he should be, he has no moral responsibility to do this, but it's very cool that he's not waiting for Marvel to give someone like that interior pages working for nothing before they're promoted up to indie world. He's like, I like your covers, I like your personality. Yeah. Let's give you a shot. Exactly. And this is an anthology. Like, I'm not promising ongoing work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's just one issue.
But here's an issue where you're going to get to do, and again, all these issues are double sized. So you got 40 some odd pages to tell this story, and I think your style fits, and you're right. Yeah. I think he's at a point at Image where he can pitch a book, and I think I would hope at least has some flexibility on who he gets to work with and who he gets to hire. An anthology book like this to bring in someone that doesn't have, someone that's not in the Image stable. Unlike the next artist for issue 3, Diego Greco, hasn't done a whole lot of work, but he has done work for Image. He's done covers of some Massiveverse books. He did a book with Joe Kelly, who we talked about, who wrote I Kill Giants, and has done a lot of work, tons of work, and will do more work with Amazing Spider-Man, this book called Bad Dog. So even though he may not have been the biggest name, he has worked for Image. He's probably already in their payroll system somewhere, versus someone like Helena Masellis, who is coming from outside. So but for them to tap these artists because they think they do something cool, or they think their style is going to fit the time period of this story in Deep Cuts, and to let those artists work for effectively 2 issues worth of material, I think is really, really cool. So you kind of have 2 artists there in Masellis and Greco that are kind of lesser well known, and then into issue 4 you have Ramon Perez, who is, I think, by far the most widely, at least to me, he's the most widely known because he's done a ton of Marvel work, and I've read almost all of it in Marvel. And he's also done a lot of creator-owned work as well. But over at Marvel, he worked on Amazing Spider-Man with Dan Slott. He worked on All New Hawkeye with Jeff Lemire, 2 series worth of that. And that was the follow-up. That was the first Hawkeye series after the Matt Fraction David Aja run. So Hawkeye was riding high, and then you bring Jeff Lemire in to do it. Ramon and Perez did a couple versions of that. He wrote a Nova book with Jeff Loveness, which saw the return of Richard Rider, the original Nova. So for fans of Nova, that was kind of a big deal.
And I'm guessing you can guess which of his books I have.
I'm guessing you probably have the Amazing Spider-Man with Dan Slott, definitely. So his Hawkeye one was great because with Lemire writing it.
I was actually thinking of Stillwater. I also have his Hawkeye.
That as well. I was going to get to that
that's
eventually
a shorter run.
Because over on still at Marvel, he did Marvel 2-in-1, which was a team up book between Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm, Human Torch and the Thing, he did that with Chip Zdarsky, which he would eventually do Stillwater with over at Image. He did Uncanny X-Force with Sam Humphries. He did an issue with Jonathan Hickman during the Krakoa era, a Magneto-centric giant-size issue special. Plus, he's just done a ton of that. That's just interior work. He's done a ton of covers, ton of variants. He also has done a lot of work as an inker, I think, earlier in his career before he was doing kind of the main pencils and line work. So he has a lot of credits at Marvel just as an inker as well. He's got a little bit of DC work. Notably, he was the artist on The Flash for a little while with Cy Spurrier. I think that's in the last handful of years he's done that. That's kind of he also again has some short runs, maybe some anthologies, little things like that. But working on
by
the
Flash,
way,
that Flash run, and this from a Flash fan is bonkers.
The Cy Spurrier written stuff.
Yeah, it's like you're 2-3 issues in, you're just like, what in the world is happening? It's like, I mean, it's trippy and weird even for the Flash. Like it's sci-fi on sci-fi on sci-fi, but the art is stunning.
Cy Spurrier is someone who does that. When he worked with, him and Al Ewing both kind of came into the X office in kind of the back half of the Cohen era, and yeah, stuff got really really wild there. That's kind of how those guys think. So I'm not surprised by that when you say that.
The intriguing thing is that starting next month we will have 2 Flash books. We will have Cy Spurrier on the main Flash and Jeff Lemire on Absolute Flash.
Yeah, absolutely. Which multiversal Flash, different.
Sure. But I think Lemire's will be more of a character-driven Flash approach, and Spurrier is doing more of the like, oh no, we're gonna study all the Speed Force, all the forces, all the sci-fi.
All that stuff. Yeah.
It's like it is like big concept Flash, which is like. That's what a lot of Flash fans want, because Barry Allen isn't always the most interesting character. Yeah. Neither is Wally West, which is our current Flash. Yeah.
But they've built out a family form. And again, having read other books written by Cy Spurrier, like I'm not surprised that he kind of went big and kind of galaxy brain with it. I'm not surprised by that at all. And I think it shows when I go back through and list a lot of those characters, kind of what Ramon Perez's his strengths are is that he's very versatile. He can draw a lot of different kinds of characters. He can handle a lot of different kinds of situations. So yeah, I think he's an artist that because of his Marvel work, I know and I read and I follow, which led to the book that you mentioned with Chip Zdarsky over at Image called Stillwater, which is a really cool book and potentially one I think maybe we could talk about.
We just keep waiting for it to wrap and.
It's done and it's had a little follow up at Kokoda there, so I think we could get to it. But it's about a town where, at some point in history, everyone stopped aging and couldn't die. A small little town there, and what happens when outsiders come in and kind of find out about it. So it's a kind of a really cool and neat story. And again, I think that came out of him working with Chip on the Marvel 2-in-1. That those guys then deciding to team up and then create their own comic over at Image, which again, that's the progression that you and I both love to see. Artist and writer coming together by whatever means over at DC and Marvel. They do a book, they do a run, they do a couple runs, whatever, and then those guys saying, "Hey, we like working together. Do you have any ideas for something we could do on our own?" And for Zdarsky and Perez, they got Stillwater, which is really really cool. Ramon Perez also was one of the artists on the Singularity, as I mentioned above. So again, tying into other creators that have also worked on this book and other people who have worked on this book. So this kind of tangled mess of cross-pollination there. So he was another one that was part of that.
Yeah.
The last things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
One more thing for Ramon Perez that I have to shout out, because it's a niche book that I happen to have read. So my wife's favorite book of all time is Jane Eyre, which I still haven't read.
I was just getting to that. So
really?
Go ahead.
I thought for sure that would be one you skipped over.
No.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I picked up that graphic novel adaptation, which only writing credit for Aline Broche McKenna, but who wrote she's 27 Dresses, Devil Wears Prada screenplay. I mean,
Crazy
big
Ex-Girlfriend
name.
on TV.
Yeah. Big name, only comic crossover type thing. The book itself was gorgeous.
And we just say the book is just called Jane. It's a modern retelling
Jane.
of Jane Eyre. It's set in current day, like Uptown Manhattan. So yeah,
A little lower stakes. I don't think the house bursts down. There's no crazy ex-wife on the third floor. Whatever. You know, it's I think Jane Eyre fans were disappointed. People like me who only know the idea of Jane Eyre liked it.
I do think McKenna was trying to address some of the current day problematic parts of the original Jane Eyre. Is that fair to say? I think. I mean, they're
probably, yeah. I mean,
yeah. Trying to course correct a little bit away from some of the parts that, when people talk about Jane Eyre, like allied over some of the not so great parts of it, and give it kind of a fresh coat, a modern day coat on it. So
yeah, but it's also one of those books that's just like a very long twisting, turning narrative. Like the best comp for me is I love Dickens. I love the book David Copperfield. Yes, it is long and winding and tangential, but it doesn't bother me. But when what's his name, who made Veep, and a couple other political movies, he made a modern version with Dev Patel playing David Copperfield. They just straight up cut out. Yes, Inucci, and they just cut out like a third of the book, and they like streamlined one of the plot points, and he doesn't like get married to the first girl and then slowly watch her die at a young age and then rediscover his love. He just kind of pulls out of the relationship when he realizes, oh, there's a bad mistake. So they just like streamlined it, and I really appreciated that because I'm like, I think you caught the essence of the character. Like, it is biographical. It is that. He's up, he's down, he's up, he's down again, and surely he will come up again in the world. And he's got like this kind of very modern sense of imposter syndrome, as a character when he's like rubbing elbows with rich people. He knows like, I don't really belong here. I'm kind of an orphan and don't have any money. So anyway, it was a very, very fun retelling, and I think that's what she was going for with Jane here. I kind of wonder if it was her pitch of like basically storyboarding, hey, here's like a teenage Jane Eyre movie I want to make.
It could be. It could be. I mean, I read that because I like Ramon Perez's art, not because I have any affection or feeling towards the story with Jane Eyre, but I had no idea who Aileen Brosh McKenna was prior to that. It wasn't until afterwards I realized, oh wait, like she's written all these movies. Most I've seen, some I've liked and not always my cup of tea, but I did wonder about that. Or maybe this was just a story she loved and this was how she wanted to tell it. It's that way too.
Yeah. So I mean, there are people who are like big comic fan, never had the guts to write a comic before. Even though they're wildly successful in other mediums.
Yeah. And so, this is maybe a story she wanted to tell. And no, I was absolutely going to get to that. Was one of the last things here. I'm
stunned. I thought that that's when you would just scroll right past.
I read it, so I'm gonna mention it. If there's a book that a creator has done that you think I should have, that you, the listener, thinks I should have mentioned, it's probably because I haven't read it. Not that I don't like it, or I think it's like actively bad. But Jane Eyre, I read Jane from Boom, and I enjoyed it because I think I have no real connection to the original Jane Eyre, the main Jane Eyre story. I like seeing a book that Ramon Perez drew. But the other book at Boom I wanted to mention, and this was what I said earlier about when I do these deep dives into these creators and I find a book on their resume that I don't even know existed, even though it's someone that a creator that I really like and enjoy. Ramon Perez drew a book called A Tale of Sand, which was based off an lost, unproduced Jim Henson screenplay that he wrote and was developing before the Muppet Show and all that stuff. This is well before that.
What in the world?
And I had no idea anything about it. It is this surreal comedy-ish. It's so hard. It's about a guy who comes into this small town in the desert, who gets thrown into this situation that he has no idea what's going on. It basically turns out like he's given a map and is like, good luck. and the town is celebrating him, and he crosses like over a line, and he's on this journey, and he has these things, and he doesn't know what's going on. And again, it's this weird, surreal, mind bendy, like very wild story that I guess that they were developing or trying to develop as a screenplay, as a movie. Then it went away when Jim Henson went and did all these other things, and then it was never done, never revisited, and it was somehow revived through the Henson Company and through his estate, and they gave it to Ramon Perez to adapt, and there's very little dialogue. I think the screenplay was, I'm sure, because it was work in progress. There's a lot of descriptions of what's happening. So there's a lot of pages where it's just Perez's art. And then kind of interspersed with kind of bursts of dialogue between characters. But it's a lot of just silent panels of him drawing the character, moving through this world, having no idea what's going on. But if you go, I highly suggest people go check it out. A Tale of Sand. I found it on Hoopla. It's out there. There are a couple versions of it. I think there's a version you can probably buy that I think it has like the actual screenplay included with it, like in a box set slipcase or whatever. But go read it. It's a wild story. It's gorgeous because I love Perez's art. But yeah, just the idea that it's a lost Jim Henson piece of work. That way I guess was sitting in a file cabinet somewhere forever. That I think I want to say it's maybe 10, 15 years old in terms of when A Tale of Sand came out. It's been a while, but I had no idea. I had no idea about it until I was doing the research for it, and I immediately went and looked it up, and I read it the next day. And yeah, it as I'm reading it, like totally melted in my mind. So it's a really, really cool book. And I think if you're kind of a Henson fan, to see this kind of early work of a path maybe he could have gone down in terms of like a filmmaker and storyteller, it's really, really wild to see. So I highly recommend that. So that's Ramon Perez. And like I said, he's easily the most well known at the time in terms of and the largest kind of CV. But again, he's someone who has worked with a lot of the people that Kyle Higgins and Joe Clark, I think, know. I think they probably know him from his work with Chip Zdarsky and things like that at Image and whatnot. So it's cool to see him. And he was one of the names that drew me to this book, along with Kyle Higgins. And when I see him there, I'm thinking, oh, he did an issue? Definitely going to check that out. Along with the artist for issue 5, Juni Ba, who hasn't done a ton of stuff, but he has such a distinct and specific style that at first I think you would think would be incongruous with the story that they're telling. But I think when you see the era in which he's writing in, because again, as an anthology books, each issue takes place in a certain different time period. When you see the era that he's in like the late 60s, early 70s, and you know what Juni Ba's style is, you're like, oh, like this fits perfectly. There's almost like an abstraction in the way he draws characters and situations and all that. And if you have a guy who's tripping on acid, spoiler alert, Juni Ba is the kind of guy you want to drawing for that. He has done a lot of stuff for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles over at IDW, both as a writer and as a cover artist. I don't know if he's done interiors for TMNT, but as a writer and cover artist, his drawings of the Turtles, I think are pretty well known. He does a lot of work as writer artist. He has a book over at Image called Monkey Meat, which has had, I think, a couple different. Like there was Monkey Meat, and then there was like it's
an anthology anyway. Yeah,
it's got a couple series. Instead of continuing the numbering, I think they get subtitles like Monkey Meat : something like that. I think it's got 2 or 3 of those. Over at like Marvel, DC, bunch of other publishers. Again, like a lot of these other creators, done covers, done some short stories, small things like that.
Can I tell you, I actually own a full variant set of Juni Ba covers and didn't know who Juni Ba was. I just liked the cover for Dark Blood. He did the entire series, which is, again, now this is a strange parallel to Perez, but that was LaToya Morgan, big TV, writer, producer, trying to move over to comics. I think that was her first foray into it. She also did the Creed adaptation, based on the third Creed movie, where he's got the daughter who's a boxer. and they did she
yeah.
wrote that as well.
Oh, did she? I
Yeah.
read that. Yeah, that's actually, for people wondering, that's a continuation when Michael B. Jordan had talked about expanding the Creed universe into, like, anime
Well,
and
Creed the
comics.
Next Round. Yeah.
Yeah. And that follows his daughter, who is now his teenage daughter, who in the movie is deaf.
So anyway, she
yeah.
wrote that. She
I didn't
also
know that.
wrote Dark Blood.
Okay.
Juni Ba did the full set of B covers for Dark Blood, which Dark Blood was one of those books that looked interesting to me. I picked it up because there's a comic shop in town, I will not mention who, when they have abandoned pools, just dump them all in the dollar box, which I have harvested, like, So even if something's vaguely interesting, I'm like, well, $1 a book, $6 for the series, done. So I picked up the whole series at once, $6. The premise is very much Isaiah Bradley. It's like Tuskegee Experiments, Super Soldier Serum,
Sure,
but
okay.
a limited 6-issue series set in its own universe. And Juni Ba has these, like, dystopian 1950s type covers
Nice.
for them that it's just perfect. Like, the A covers are outstanding as well, and it's a Boom Studios book that went bananas with variants. There's like an A and a B, and then just incentives and exclusives, like crazy.
Boom does that, but I think that speaks to Juni Ba's style, that he is someone who, if you know his style, if you know his work, he becomes an artist that if he has a cover of something, you're going to say, oh, that's Juni Ba cover. Like, it will jump out at you. It's distinctive enough. And very recently, he did a really, really cool book over at DC called The Boy Wonder. He was a writer artist on that. It is a Damian Wayne Robin story, but it's told in this veneer of like a Middle Eastern fairy tale type in terms of kind of the language and the narration and all that. But it's super cool. It's super stylized. They being DC just allowed Ba to tell the story his way and his style. And again, it's so distinct. It's so specific to him. It's a very, very, very cool series. I want to say it was 3 oversized issues. Maybe they were perfect bound, like square bound, but super, super, super cool book. But again, I'm not surprised that you, Mike, would have covers by him and not know it. Because
but it's exactly what I said at the beginning of the episode.
Because his visual style is that unique and that specific, and I think that would appeal to you. You see someone like that, and you're like, you don't even know, but this is his work. This is this artist's work. I love her stuff. Oh my God, what else has she done? What else has this guy worked on?
Right. And it's kind of nice when he's like,
way.
he does good covers, but he doesn't do so many, because like I used to have artists where I was like, I'll automatically pull their covers, like a Jock or someone, and it's like, if
like
you
an
are
art germ, that's tough. Yeah,
right, if you're an art germ Jock or like Alex Ross, God forbid, fan, who has to have every cover, you got an expensive lifestyle.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
You better only be getting those. So Juni Ba being on this, kind of at a time where I think he's getting more and more kind of recognition or not recognition. He's got plenty of recognition, exposure, I think.
Yes.
Again, the Boy Wonder, I think at DC was the kind of thing where he excels, where give him a story that is or isn't in continuity, no one cares. You know what? It's a cool miniseries. Let him write it. Let him draw it. I'd love to see him do something similar over at Marvel, a similar type thing where you give him 3-4 issues and just let him do his thing. Let him be unshackled by any sort of ongoing thing. Let him tell his own story. I think it'd be really, really cool. So that brings us to the last artist, issue 6, Toby Cypress, who again, not the most amount of work, but done some things that are notable. Over at Image, he did a book called The Gravediggers Union with Wes Craig.
Relatively big book.
Yeah. And Wes Craig has a big name. People probably knew him first from the artist on Deadly Class with Rick Remender, and currently doing Kaya, his own book that he writes and draws himself. He also, Toby Cypress, the only other work I've known him for, and I didn't know who he was at the time, he did a book called Retcon with writer Matt Nixon.
Yeah, I've met Matt.
Retcon is it's a wild premise of a book. It's a super meta idea. It's a book that is about going back and retconning and rebooting a comic that never existed into existence. It plays with the idea of retconning in comics and stories and makes it kind of a literal idea, like an agency that goes back and does this stuff. It gets really meta and really weird. But again,
which hilariously, Matt Nixon said he intends to follow up that series, but with a different publisher.
Yes,
so he has to retcon enough to make it a distinct property with another. And I was
it's many levels of yes, yeah. But I didn't know Toby Cypress at the time, and I read that book. So again, that idea of, oh, this is someone, who is this person? Oh God, I've read A, B, and C by them already.
I'm gonna guess the issue I'm certain that you have from him.
Oh,
Can I take a guess?
Is the Omega Man, right?
Yep. Of course. I was like, because you were the Tom Queen. Or Tom King.
He did an issue of the Omega Man, which was an early Tom King book that the main series artist was Barnaby Bagenda, and this was a book that critics loved and like 18 people bought, and it was canceled partway through. And DC got so much feedback that they said, okay, fine, we'll let him finish it. Like, I think it was canceled after like 8, and they let him go all the way to 12 to finish the story. It's an early blueprint for how Tom King writes superheroes, and that it's really dark and sad and depressing. But it was wildly critically acclaimed, and that was one of the books that eventually got him Batman. Over at DC, it was that, and I think he was doing the Vision over at Marvel at the same time, and then he signed exclusive at DC while Vision was still finishing up, and he was announced as the Batman writer. So, but yeah, Toby Cypress, he did one issue of that. I think it was issue 4, just kind of as a fill in, a change up pace there. But again, not someone with a ton of credits. I think when you go back through all 6 artists, Ramon Perez may have more credits than, or as many as like kind of the rest of them combined
together. Yeah.
At least when we're talking about interior work as artists. So there's this crazy mix that Clark and Higgins put together to tell this story. And again, because of the anthology nature and each issue being in a time and place, finding the right artist that fits the character style, the environment style, and all that. It works seamlessly because in your mind, like every issue, you're jumping to somewhere else. You're meeting different characters, and so there's no disconnect in your mind going from issue to issue to issue. You're primed for it already, and the way it all weaves together, I think, is perfect.
Yeah. Is there anything else we need to go over on the creator front, or should we talk about the book a little bit?
Last thing I think I'll mention real quick is all the covers are done by Chris Brunner and Rico Renzi. So all the covers are done that way. You're not going to go through kind of all their stuff there, but they had, they brought in a unifying force, I guess, for all the covers, and they're a specific style. They're kind of a collagist style almost in the way you look at them. But I think another way they could have gone with the series, right, is to have each interior artist do a cover, for their issue. I think maybe there would have been a disconnect there in terms of seeing the different styles on the cover. So I think probably the right move, get one creative team just to do the covers for all the books. So there's a unifying feel on that on the shelf. But then from a storytelling standpoint, you bring in the specific artist that you want for that tale. So mention them, Chris Brunner and Rico Renzi as the covers, which I think are very, very cool. So
yeah. So much to say about it, but the image synopsis here doesn't give us much, but we can start with it. Yeah,
why don't you read that? It's pretty short, and I think it's incomplete actually. But go ahead.
It's not even a pitch. New Orleans, 1917. A clarinet player meets his hero. Kansas City, 1940. A young girl investigates the mystery of her father's lost love of music. Los Angeles, 1977. A band embarks on a world tour that may be their last. That doesn't even cover all the issues. That's
I think that's issue 1, 3, and 6. I think, right?
right. It's
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
I guess they were in a big hurry to get the trade paperback done.
I don't know.
But
I don't know.
but it seems like they could go retcon that on the website
Yeah.
anytime they want.
Do you want to read that? I mean, the next line there, writers Kyle Higgins and Joe Clark, Radiant
Oh,
Black are
sure.
joined by an all-star cast of artists. And this is the important thing. For an anthology of stories that weave tales of struggle, joy, and hope through the history of jazz. And so that last bit is what the story is about. That they're telling they're telling character stories, and in a lot of ways, the story of America in the 20th century through the story and history of jazz. And I think there's, I actually remember one time when I was in Chicago at C2E2, I was talking to Kyle Higgins, and what was it? Yeah. I was asking about Alex Siegel, who was his co-writer on Cowl and the Dead Hand, not the Dead Hand, Cowl and Hadrian's Wall, the book that the two of them did with Rod Rice, and because he was scheduled to be at the show, and he wasn't there the day that I was there, Friday, and Cowl was like, oh yeah, he'll be in late today, and then but like afterwards, like we're going down to whatever club and like we're playing music and whatnot, like after they were done, like they were going to a jazz club. Like, and I think Joe Clark was in, like, they were going to go and play. Like these people who love the music and play it and are part of the community. And so again, I think their love for it is genuine. The love for the music and all of that. They're students of it, but at the same time, it's something you have to mention. So, but that all being said, the story that they weave, or these stories that they weave throughout this comic, this anthology, I think is beautifully well done from a storytelling standpoint, which we'll definitely get into more next week in terms of how things weave together and this type of storytelling construct. I do think it is very cool. I do think it's admirable. And as someone who is a fan of jazz myself, but not a student of it, like I like it when I hear it, but I don't really go seek it out. I think this book is very cool in its approach of to the subject, regardless of who the creators are and what their background is. It is an idea that interests me, that you can follow the history of jazz throughout the 20th century and get a picture of America as a country.
Yeah. I think that's 100% true. This is one of those things I'm sure we'll get into more as the book goes on. Mm-hmm. I would also consider myself I'm nowhere near jazz aficionado, but I am definitely a fan.
Neither am I.
I have jazz classics. I got really into like Coltrane and Miles Davis, and then started, eking my way up to modern jazz with, Kamasi Washington. If you count them, Snarky Puppy, I'm a big fan of. They won Best Live Jazz Album, but I think there are still people who don't consider them jazz.
Right. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, there's gatekeeping.
Of course there is. Yeah.
Especially in the modern world.
Yeah. So again, I don't delve into any of that. But it's more of just, I'm a fan of it when I hear it. But yeah, no, I think this book, if you know nothing about jazz or just vaguely familiar with it, I think the way it tracks, I think, you can see they go out of their way again to weave not only their stories together, but to weave the story of jazz into the time period that they're telling. Whether we're starting in 1917, going into the 40s, 50s, into the 60s and the 70s and all that. And if you have an understanding of American history, you can see how jazz plays into that and into their story as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're just cool stories, and I think a lot of them are like amalgamations of like actual stories of. I think this is to the actual history of jazz and particular musicians, what the Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay are to like the origin of Marvel DC.
That is, I think that's I didn't even think about it. That's a great comp, that their characters are stand-ins for the type of musician or person that existed in the era, but yet they are interacting. Like I think they name drop a bunch of artists and stuff and groups and quartets, and some of them I know are real and other ones I didn't know I assumed were real, that so you have fictional characters interacting with the real life musicians of that time and era, but they are stand-ins for the type of musician you would have encountered at the time. I think Cavalier and Clay is a great comp, because you have a fictional creators creating a character that didn't exist for a publisher, that didn't exist, but existing in a world where timely comics and detective comics eventually exist,
Right. Yeah, I think that's the basic comp, is like, if you like, I think this is more fun than watching a Ken Burns jazz documentary. No offense, PBS, but you get the flavor of a lot of those stories. And I think this is like, this should be like mandatory reading if you go to like the New Orleans Jazz Festival every year, which my father-in-law does. He goes down there and it's not strictly jazz. There's a tent that's like blues and gospel and all this other, but like all of these that came from same source, same origin, lots of overlap in players. I think this is the starter pack, right? It's like, read this exactly
to give you the broad strokes, and then it's up to you to then maybe in each of those eras, after each issue, what was, you start that first issue in 1917 in New Orleans, and then you read that, and then you need to go down that rabbit hole and see where jazz went specifically in that time frame. So this will give you the high level highlights of the history of jazz, but it'd be incumbent on you to continue to drill down and go deeper and really get lost in it. So I do think for someone, if you know nothing about it or very little about the history of jazz, I think this gives you a nice overview that, if you're then so inclined, gives you some direction as to how to go forward if you want to go deeper.
Yeah, 100%. And hopefully it gets you inspired to like listen to one subgenre of jazz that I'm not really into is like the Dixieland jazz, which I think is what like issue 1 kind of represents.
Very early, yeah.
But I think if you like put on some Dixieland jazz while you're reading that book and you like feel the street style of it, I think having that context gives you your best chance to enjoy that music. And jazz is very different based on the city it's coming from.
Yeah, the city,
which is why we hop around locations.
Exactly, the city you come from, the era in which it comes out of. So yeah, I think they do a good job covering, again, the broad strokes. You're not getting super detailed kind of analysis or breakdown, but you're getting a sense of what it was like. I think what they're trying to do is just get a sense of what it was like in that era for musicians of that time. And then again, it would then be incumbent on you. And there's some essays in the back. I think Joe Clark writes a little bit. He highlights artists, I think, that are playing or representative of that style. He writes a little essay talking about that time period and then the music of that era and that place, to try to give a little more context. But yeah, definitely. I think if you read these issues or any of the issues and it sparks some interest or thought about that era, I think you then have a little bit of a roadmap of how to go down if you want to keep exploring. And I think that's what this book does well, and that it gives you enough that if you want to know more, it kind of shows you, it gives you some early first steps on how to continue down if you want to go.
Absolutely. And I think that's really all we ought to say, other than go pick this up. Single issues are like substantial enough that they can sit on a bookshelf with trades. You don't need a bag and board for these single issues. I think you probably save a little money on the trade, because it is like, I think they're like $6 issues because of the double size.
Exactly. Yeah. But the trade is out there. I think you can, you'll find the single issues out there. Again, we're always in I'm always in favor of going out and collecting single issues and having them if that's your bag. So they're available, because the book is still relatively recent, and Kyle Higgins is enough of a name that I think people go out and look for his stuff. But the trade will definitely be available, whether it's your comic shop, maybe even a bookshop, Hoopla, again, your library or whatever. It's out there to go find. It's new enough and kind of recent enough that I think it's still pretty available in kind of any format you want to find it.
Absolutely. All right. With all of that said, we will see you back here next week after you've read 6 double-sized issues and are ready to talk some jazz. And maybe we'll come up with like a special intro song for the podcast next week.
That may not push our luck, but maybe, who knows? Yeah.
Well, if Kyle Higgins or Joe Clark make one for us, we'll use that.
That'd be great.
So, all right. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Peace.